Hello everyone, my name is Talisha, also known as CreativiTeeByT, and today's video is a sew-along of Simplicity 9470 View A, and this sew-along can also be used to make View B because the only difference is the sleeve length. This pattern does require an invisible zipper, so I included a step-by-step invisible zipper tutorial within the video. So the supplies that you will need for this project is as follows. You will need your fabric, and for View A, which is what we are making, the designer only gave a 60-inch fabric cut option, and that is because of how the pattern piece is cut, which you will see shortly. The rest of the views are able to be made by using both 45-inch fabric and 60-inch fabric. You will also need coordinating thread, scissors or a rotary cutter, pins or pattern weights, a 22-inch invisible zipper, and a seam ripper. So let's get started. So the first pattern piece that you're going to need is pattern piece number 1, which is your front, and you're going to cut 1. You will need to cut pattern piece number 2, which is your back, and you're going to cut 2. You'll need pattern piece number 3, which is your front facing, and you're going to cut 1 on the fold. You'll need pattern piece number 4, which is your back facing, and you're going to cut 2. You'll need pattern piece number 5, which is your peplum front, and you're going to cut 1 on the fold. And lastly, you will need pattern piece number 6, which is your peplum back, and you will need to cut 2. So now that you have all your pattern pieces cut out, go ahead and lay them on your fabric to make sure that they all fit before you start cutting. And what you're seeing with pattern piece number 1, which is the front, you only cut one of those. So I have half of that pattern piece hanging off just to make sure that there is enough for the whole entire width of the pattern piece. And I do have enough, so I'm going to go ahead and pin the fabric down and go ahead and start cutting. Now what you're seeing me do here is I am getting ready to change the direction of the fabric for the front pattern piece. I just left it laying flat on the fabric initially because I didn't want to switch the direction up until I was ready to cut it. So now I'm laying the fabric out flat because you only need to cut 1, and I'm going to lay my pattern piece down and I'm going to pin it and cut out the pattern piece. So once you've cut out all of your pattern pieces, you want to go ahead and clip all of your notches and transfer all of your markings for your front pleats. I used a lighter chalk, so this is just a close-up of what the transfers for my pleats look like. To make the pleats in the front, on the outside of pattern piece number 1, we're going to fold along the solid lines, and then we're going to bring the folds to the broken lines. And after we finish all of the pleats, we are going to baste across the raw edges on the bottom. Once your pleats have been pinned, it should look something like this, and then you're going to want to go to the sewing machine to make a basting stitch across the raw edge to keep the pleats in place. And this is what your basting stitch should look like, and then go to the iron and give your pleats a good press. Now we are going to go to the sewing machine and we are going to stay stitch the neck edge of the front and back sections, and we're going to do that by stitching a 1/2 inch from the cut edge of the neckline. And this is what your stay stitching should look like for both your front and your back pattern pieces. So now we are going to pin our sleeves together and our side seam, and what we are going to do is we're going to stitch the back to the front at the overarm, also known as the shoulders, and the entire underarm seams, and then we're going to stitch again along the underarm curve to reinforce the seams, and then we're going to clip curves if necessary. So once you've pinned the shoulder and the underarm, you're going to want to go ahead and take it to the sewing machine, and you're going to want to do this to both sides. And just remember, once you've made your first stitch, you're going to want to make your second stitch to reinforce and then clip curves. So now that we are finished stitching our shoulder and underarm seams, we are going to stay stitch the front and back sections of the upper edge of the peplum pattern pieces. And this is what your stay stitching should look like. So now we are going to connect the two back peplum pieces by stitching the center back seam of the back peplum sections below the notch by back stitching at the notch to reinforce the seam. So it's going to be the shortest part of the back peplum pieces. So now that you have stitched the back peplum pieces below the notch, you're going to want to stitch the back peplum to the front peplum sections at the side seams. So once you've pinned your side seams and connect your notches to match up with each other, go ahead to the sewing machine and sew the seam down with the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So once you have connected your front and back peplum pieces at the side seams, this is what it should look like. And at this time, you should take the opportunity to finish your edges with a serger. And I would also encourage you to finish the edges from your top portion of the top, because at this point, we are going to go ahead and attach the peplum to the top portion of the top. So now we are going to attach the peplum to the top portion of our top, and we're going to do that by getting the right sides of the fabric facing, so right sides together and raw edges even. We're going to pin the peplum to the lower edge of the bodice, matching centers and side seams, clipping curves to stay stitching where necessary, and then we're going to stitch with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then we are going to press the seam towards the bodice. So once you have pinned your top portion to the peplum pieces, it should look something like this, and then you want to take it to the sewing machine and sew with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And your top should look a little something like this once your top portion is connected to your peplum. Okay, so now we are going to work on installing our back zipper, and it's an invisible zipper. You will need a 22-inch, and what I'm going to do is I am not going to follow the instructions. I am going to install the invisible zipper the way I know to do it, the way I feel comfortable doing it. So first, what I am going to do is I am going to pin up the whole entire back seam all the way down to where we stitched in the back, and then I am going to baste down the whole entire seam all the way until we get to our stitching that we did previously. So again, I'm going to pin, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and do a basting stitch all the way down until we meet our stitch that we did at the bottom of our back peplum. And the basting stitch is the longest stitch on the sewing machine. So I'm going to start by matching up my seams, because you want those to match at all times. I'm going to pin that first. Then I'm going to come to my corners, and then I'm going to pin the remainder. So this is what it looks like when it has been pinned, and I'm going to take it to the sewing machine, and I am going to do a basting stitch, which is the longest stitch on your sewing machine, from the top of the back to where we started our stitch at the bottom of the back peplum. So now that the back seam has been basted, I'm going to take it to the iron, and I am going to iron the seam open so that it looks like this. So now that we have pressed our seam open, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to place washi tape, which is this tape right here, down on each side of my seam allowance for my zipper. So I already put one here so that you can see how it looks, and I placed it from the top and I put it all the way down to where our regular stitches go at the bottom of the peplum. And I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. Now when you wash this, it does come out immediately. So I'm just going to press down and make sure that the adhesive sticks to the fabric properly, and then I'm going to pull it up. All right, so now that our tape is down, what I'm going to do is I'm going to place my invisible zipper face down on the tape, and I'm going to put the ends of the tapes, I'm going to lay them directly down on the washi tape so that they stick. This eliminates you from having to pin the zipper down. I find that pinning just shifts all over, and sometimes it doesn't work out for me and it's not even. So I like to use this method instead. All right, so now that the zipper is placed on the seam, I am going to take the zipper foot and I am going to baste down on each side of the seam allowance first. This is our zipper foot, so you want to make sure you use that. And what I've done is I've made sure that I flattened out my seams so that I am only stitching through the zipper tape in the seam, and I am making basting stitch all the way to the end of the zipper tape. And your basting stitches should look something like this. So now that I have it basted down to the inside of the seams, I am going to take this basting stitch out. So I'm just taking a seam ripper and I'm opening up the back middle seam of the basting stitches that we did, not the basting stitches that we applied to the zipper tape and the seam, but the actual back seam that connects the two back pieces together. Now that the basting stitches have been removed, go ahead and unzip your zipper and then turn your shirt inside out. Okay, so now that I have my basting stitch open, I am going to take this back to the sewing machine and I'm going to use the zipper foot, open this all the way out on each side and stitch all the way into the zipper teeth right here so that our invisible zipper is truly invisible. So again, although it looks like this because it has been pressed and basted down, we're going to totally open it up so that it lays flat like this, and then we're going to stitch all the way in as close as to the zipper teeth as possible. Now that we have our zipper installed, look how beautiful it is. You cannot see anything. This is how you install a beautiful invisible zipper. What we're going to do is we're going to work on our facing pieces. We're going to take our facings and we're going to pin our back facing to our front facing just like so, and we're going to go to the sewing machine and stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that we have our facing stitched together, we are going to pin it to our top. So now that the facing is attached to our top, I am going to trim the seam allowance, and then we are going to do an understitching, which is stitching very close to the seam but on the facing side. So I'm going to press facing down. Ooh, look at that beautiful seam. Same over here, and then we're going to understitch, stitching from here and going all the way to the opposite end. Now that we have understitched our facing, all we have to do is hem our sleeves and our peplum and secure the seams at the shoulders on the inside, and we're all finished.